Hello, everyone. I hope you're feeling well. So we'll try to have today two debates about the topics that are here. The first one, I'll read the motions of the debates. First one, it is preferable to build a frictionless system that maximizes volume of contributions at the risk of wasting DAO funds than it is to build a measured system that maximizes return on DAO spending at the risk of losing contributions. And the second debate will be around the motion. The DAO should be willing to fully delegate certain powers rather than limiting committees to an advisory role and requiring all actions to go through a majority vote. So the motivation behind these two subjects was certain proposals during the last couple of months, some of which are PUP 22, FREN, also PEP 41, 42, 39, 43. So the bounty program, the independent pocket credit marketing budget, the economic R&D funding, etc. And we wanted to have debates around these subjects because it is clear that there is willingness to have more contributions and to see how we can create win-win situations for the community and the DAO and everyone here in this environment. So before getting to the debates, whose motions were worded in communication with the debaters themselves, we'd like to hear your feelings about the subjects, the topics, not to get really into arguments because we want that for the debates, but what do you think about the choice of the motions, about the subjects themselves? Anyone wants to jump in? Go ahead.
Is
Yes.
that to anybody or to the debaters?
Anyone, yeah. So the first 10, 15 minutes is open floor for anyone to share any thoughts and feelings on the subject, on the theme. Doesn't have to be structured. Yeah, just want to hear anyone's feelings.
I mean, I guess I can share what I've shared with the other debaters. I think generally that everybody is going to fall somewhere in between. So I don't think there's a clear line between frictionless and measured. Those are sort of broad poles. It's really just a question of like where that is. I mean, if you're defining frictionless as like literally frictionless, you would just give all the money away in a first come, first served basis. I don't think anybody's advocating for that, but that would be 100% frictionless. The other end of that spectrum is, you know, every single thing would be scrutinized to the nth, and nobody wants that either. So it's really just a question of what are the measures, yeah. So I think everybody is somewhere in the middle. I mean, that's my, I guess, thought.
Yeah, cheers, Steve. It's Dermot here. I don't want to get right into debate already, but yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic. I think it's clear that a lot of people have quite different perspectives about this. So I do really think that aligning on what we all kind of roughly think is the kind of the right direction, at least, will allow us to move forward, because I think it is kind of causing blockers, as I think Moez referred to in certain kind of forum proposals, and kind of just, yeah, I guess unblocking a lot of potential contribution, really. And I think once we have alignment, we can all move a lot more quicker, more generally. So yeah, I think it's a good, fun topic, and it should be a good debate. But I think the nice thing about this kind of framework, I guess, it's ultimately constructive. I think we're all here ultimately on the same team, and it's fun to kind of have a structured way to talk about some of these issues.
Thanks, Dermot. Anyone else?
If you're trying to unmute yourself and are finding yourself unable to, just post a message in the community call chat, and we'll be able to give you the permission to do so.
I was going to comment to Dermot's point, being part of the debate group, I found it really helpful to hear and listen to the different perspectives. And so I think this is going to be really a good exercise, because you really do have to consider both sides, and you learn as other people present their points kind of where you really stand in that spectrum.
We have Sevi typing in the chat. That's a shame. He can't hear us. Okie dokie. There's no further comments. We could probably get started on debate number one.
Okay.
For everyone's reference, given the wordiness of some of the debate propositions, I pasted them into the chat so you can revisit them there if you're not quite sure what the specifics are that are being debated.
Okay. So I'll try to present the format in less than 5 minutes. But before that, please, everyone, we have a survey, the proposal survey, and we're trying to gauge what are the things that we can do to upgrade the proposal process. So please, if you can give it a little bit of time, that would be very helpful to get the contribution of everyone into making the process better. So please get to the survey and fill it in, and thank you. So we have 2 debates of around 45 minutes each. For each debate, we have 2 teams. So the jargon will be the motion, which is the subject of the debate. Proposition will defend this motion, and opposition is the team that will go against it. Each team has around 15 minutes total, divided into 4 speeches. And for each team, we have between 2 and 4 debaters. So there will be debaters that take more than 1 speech. So there are 2 also, like last time, we will have intervention and questions of the audience before the final speeches. So please, if you have any questions or comments that you can formulate in less than 30 seconds, please, you can write them down if you want to intervene before the final speeches. For the flow, we have a format that is a little bit different than last time. We will start by the proposition, 5 minutes. And then opposition, we have a block of 7 minutes, 3 minutes, then 4 minutes, which will be about rebuttal, and then to construct their own case. And then we get back to proposition with 7 minutes, also rebuttal, and then reconstruction of case. And then we get back to opposition for 5 minutes. This is the first part, and then we get to the audience. We'll try to have a balanced number of interventions for each team. And then we finish with opposition speech, 3 minutes to wrap up the debate and answer the questions, and then proposition, 3 minutes. So there are two different main things compared to last time. There is an extra speech in this debate so that we can have more depth and reconstruction, a second layer for the arguments compared to the last debate. The second thing is we will have direct interaction between the teams, which we call POI, or point of information. So we will have, if someone is speaking from a team, the other members of the other team have the right to say question or comment. If they say that, the speaker has the power to allow that question or say, no, thank you, I'll get to you later, or something like that. It will be no more than 2 points of information or interventions per speech for 4 minutes and 5 minute speeches, and only 1 for 3 minute speeches. And that is for the first phase, not for the last speeches, so that we can have a little bit of interaction between the teams directly. This is important, and we'll try to make it work in this debate. So I would like to thank the debaters that volunteered. Very, very nice of them, and they've done a little bit of research for the last couple of weeks, and they were very helpful in wording the debates, in discussing how we should do things. So I would like to thank them for their constructive mindset and their efforts. The debate topics, as I said, were based on recent proposals, on also interacting and the feedback of the community. And without further ado, we will go to debate one. It is preferable to build a frictionless system that maximizes volume of contributions at the risk of wasting DAO funds than it is to build a measured system that maximizes return on DAO spending at the risk of losing contribution. So the proponents are Dermot and Nelson, and the opponents are Steve, Jinx, Rovel, and Ramiro, and Zatar. So we'll start with the first speaker from proposition. Dermot, please, sir, you have the floor. 5 minutes.
Great. Hello, wonderful audience. So yes, I'm Dermot, and I'll be speaking to you with my esteemed colleague, Nelson Ryan. I guess before jumping in, there's clearly a lot of verbiage in the motion itself. The way we've been thinking about it, the motion kind of really boils down to two questions. Whether it's more costly to lose out on contributions and risk spending, or to risk spending some money that we aren't guaranteed to get back. And also the second question being how to manage contributors. So we believe the other side will tell you all about the need to control and monitor all contributors, while we're here to tell you that it's okay to trust and to grant people autonomy over what they do and how they do it. And in fact, not to do so will be fatal to this project. Ultimately, the answers to these questions go to the heart of what our DAO is and what it stands for. Before diving in, there definitely are, as I said, quite a lot of verbiage in the kind of the statements themselves and the motions. So to unpack some of the definitions, when we say frictionless, in terms of frictionless system, we're ultimately talking about UX. And from the leading UX philosophies of today, the idea is to design more intuitive, human-centered products and experiences. So the ideal of a frictionless system, therefore, should be the one that leads to the most intuitive, human-centered experience. And in terms of volume of contributions, the assumption here is that every contribution is something of value. We're not talking about spam proposals. And finally, I guess when considering the arguments today, we ask our very learned and esteemed audience to keep in mind two questions. The first being which approach most aligns with Pocket's mission? And secondly, which approach do we believe will deliver the most value to the Pocket ecosystem? So the three arguments that myself and Nelson will talk to you about are, firstly, that traditional corporate management fails its workers. Secondly, the need to leverage the community as a priority. And thirdly, losing out on some potentially game-changing contributions to Pocket is much worse than the risk of spending some money the DAO won't get back. So to begin with argument one, the default position in a legacy organization is that you don't have legacy, traditional, call it what you will, is that you don't have the right to do anything unless you're given permission. This arises from a theory of control that the best way to eliminate risk is through compliance. Research tells us that this traditional carrot and stick approach works well for more monotonous routine work, like packaging goods in a factory, but is completely out of sync with non-routine right brain abilities on which many of the world's economies now depend, and which most of the work we're talking about for the Pocket DAO. I'm sure most of the people here will have felt this in some way or another in your past. You've seen some of the problems with the status quo, the bureaucracy, the lack of agency, rigidity, slow-moving, unresponsive, arbitrary decision-making. Luckily, there is a better way. Researchers at Cornell have showed that with a study on 320 small businesses, half of which granted workers autonomy and the other half relying on top-down direction, the businesses that offered autonomy grew at 4 times the rate of the control-oriented firms. And there are many other brilliant case studies around businesses that are offering more autonomy versus control. The latest research ultimately tells us that what humans really want is the freedom and autonomy to choose what work to do, how to do it, and who with. They say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So the question to all of you is whether as DAO members we choose to repeat what every other traditional organization does and to expect different results, or do we work together from first principles to make sure everyone has the autonomy and freedom to serve Pocket's mission? A second argument is that there is a need to leverage the community as a priority. Pocket is a grassroots project which leverages a bottoms-up developer community to drive developer adoption. As a result, it is important it's actually, in fact, it's not important, just important, it's crucial for the project to invest in community as its clear competitive advantage. And a failure for Pocket's community to reach escape velocity is fatal to its future. We risk simply allowing Pocket to become irrelevant and a bookmark in history. And if we agree this is the case, I guess the question then is to ask, what is the best way to grab the bull by the horns and grow the community? Is it by means of creating a formal monitoring system of compliance with the necessary bureaucracy around it? Or how about we choose to start much more simply and not over-engineer things? So an example of a very simple working culture that combines autonomy with accountability is that of Juicebox DAO. So in Juicebox DAO, the way it works for new contributors is that they join the Discord, they introduce themselves, usually express some interest and share some knowledge around their skill set, and suggest that there's some work that they'd like to do, or else there's some other work that the DAO isn't doing that maybe they should do. And then they propose a small sum, often as little as $500 or less, in return for a 2-week probation period, where the DAO members can see them for the, yeah. So was that?
Yeah.
Am I over time?
Yeah. If you have a final sentence
seconds?
to finish. Yeah, okay.
I was going to talk about how Juicebox gets going, but yeah, sure. They pay each other 2 weeks, and that's the only downside. Yeah, I guess the final sentence would really be, unless we onboard more contributors, we'll never know what we don't know. And in the world of open source, as it's our community, not our technology, that's the true moat. We should really be really thoughtful about making Pocket the best place for any potential DAO contributor to come to work.
Thank you, Dermot, for the speech. And now we get to the answer by the opposition. Jinx, I guess, or was the first speaker?
Zatar is our first rebuttal.
Perfect. Okay.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. I see we have more than 50 people here. That's harkens back to the late days of 2021.
So just to explain, so now we have 3 minutes and 4 minutes. It's a block of 7 minutes, but if you want, you can be flexible with your 7 minutes between yourselves, okay?
We're starting the clock now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the anti-friction faction, represented just now by Dermot, makes a few points. I'll briefly summarize what they are and respond to each in turn. Generally, however, the response to each point is similar. The friction that control measures introduce will discourage contributions, says Dermot and company. This will put a damper on network growth and enhancements. Now, we agree that there is a potential downside to control measures, but the extent of this downside is totally dependent on the nature of the control measures. The measures that our side of this debate advocates are minimal. We by no means are advocating for traditional top-down corporate management. That's absolutely not what we're going to be proposing. Jinx will detail what the measures we're advocating are momentarily, but in broad strokes, we're promoting a minimal, mostly opt-in review process for proposals before they're made public in the forum. And for non-simple proposals, we're promoting a model where proposers, will float their scheme and see if it has community support before they invest time and resources into developing it. If the community approves the scheme, then the proposer would roll out his or her proposal in stages and seek reimbursement at each stage. Our side of this debate is also advocating for an oversight body, whatever that might be, to evaluate whether the project has met its milestones before obtaining the funding that they were seeking. These are essentially the controls for which we'll be arguing. So I haven't gone into a lot of detail, but I hope it's clear that these controls are modest and very unlikely to discourage contributors. The second point that the anti-friction faction makes is that the friction generated by control measures will result in fewer contributions to the ecosystem being made by community members, as opposed to people working for Pocket Network Incorporated. Now, Dermot didn't refer to this, but this is one of the points that he was hoping to have time to make, but he ran out of time. This, according to his faction, would reinforce the centralized character of Pocket Network, which in turn could create regulatory risk and undermine the project's legitimacy. Again, our position is that where friction is minimal, the community's desire to contribute will be virtually unaffected. The anti-friction faction also says that Pocket Network could miss out on amazing contributions if we put controls in place. Again, the deterrent effect of controls will be negligible if these controls, as we propose, are minimal. Now, we agree with the anti-friction camp that creating a healthy DAO culture of accountability and responsibility is more valuable than a formal system of compliance. But in our view, a healthy culture of accountability, responsibility can be nurtured by carefully designed control measures that serve as a rational framework, not as a deterrent. Overall, a frictionless system more progress.
Just to challenge that, actually, I think it's clear. I think you all accepted my definition of a frictionless system being one that's more intuitive and human-centered. So I think you're actually agreeing with what we're saying and our general argument that we should be designing a system that's more intuitive and human-centered, and which we fully agree with. So I think we're in line with that. So I think frictionless is something that you're on board with, which is good.
Can we ask
I'll let Jinx speak to that, but yes, there's certainly some agreement between our two sides. Regarding sorry,
Dhahri, just
yes.
because Jinx will need time to present your case. It's probably time to give him his minutes.
Is that my 3 minutes?
Yeah, it's almost for 5 minutes now.
Okay,
so
Jinx, sorry.
For Jinx, Jinx, you have 3 minutes and a half. Because of the intervention of Dermot, so 30 seconds plus, and 30 seconds because they had more than 5 minutes. So you have 3 minutes and a half. Go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll try and move quickly here. I know apparently some of the folks who are more formal debaters have like written out actual speeches and all the rest of that, which seems to take a little bit of time as you're moving through it. I'm just going to go from the hip here. We have fundamentally 4 major points of concern in regards to a laissez-faire approach to DAO proposals. There's generally a lack of accountability.
Just to challenge that, Jigs, we're not proposing a laissez-faire approach, just to make it that clear.
So you're proposing measures?
Are we going to
Sorry?
be able to have timed segments or not? I feel like we're not following any sort of a formal structure here.
For the interventions, please either write something in the chat or ask the permission, but the speaker is the one that gives permission for interventions. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jinx.
There are 4 major points that I think are a concern in a, let's say, frictionless approach. Lack of accountability and lack of oversight. Those are kind of hand-in-hand things that have some slightly different nuance. That we want to have outcome-focused governance, and that there needs to be some structure for contributor due diligence. Lack of accountability and lack of oversight I'm going to present together because I think we have a strong historical perspective on why those are concerns. I'll call out 3 projects in particular: the WPocket project, the DApp Node project, and the Pocket Wallet mobile app project. All three of those were passed. All three of those went into some degree of languishing and obscurity, even though some funds had already been paid out for various work that had been done or was promised to be done. And then there was zero sense of what progress had been made for months and months and months on end until the community had, finally had enough of not hearing anything and started to come together to make some noise about it. But that took so long that fundamentally some things that were planned within the community, within our economy, things like WPocket listings and using the secondary functions of ERC20 tokens to build things around the ecosystem, died on the vine. It took so long with so little oversight and so little accountability for that progress that literally projects such as Pocket Rockets, which were reliant on the release of WPocket in a timely fashion, have, essentially become a gallery project versus the longer term expansion of how we wanted the automation of that project to work. Lack of accountability and lack of oversight in these kinds of projects can be huge killers when there is an economy and an ecosystem around a project. And so having a hands-off approach that doesn't have any framework for accountability is like death to the project itself, much less the community. Outcome-focused governance essentially says, here are the goals that we want to accomplish, and let's create a structure and a framework for that. I thought it was an important point that trust was brought up earlier. A lot of us want to be more experimental and open to ambitious and innovative approaches to DAO proposals, but without some structure to help enforce that trust, we are less likely to support that. And we've seen that with several proposals recently. Additionally, contributor due diligence, I think, is an important part of this process. Having a little bit more structure coming in and having the ability to say, here's who I am and here are the skills that I bring to the table is an important factor in having the trust required to vote for that. When Pocket Fund came through the first time and we had no idea who they were, Pocket Blade and the rest of that group, no one was willing to support a proposal. In fact, it was almost considered offensive that this proposal was out here making such a big ask without having any sort of idea who these people were at all, what skills they brought to the table, etc. When they came back around and had engaged with the community and provided some due diligence on their own by doxing themselves, essentially, their second proposal was passed and supported by the community. Community is fundamentally about people who trust each other working together towards a common goal. And if we can't have frameworks that help enforce that trust and some sense of knowing who the people in our community are, then we're not going to have the outcome-focused governance that we want. We all want to achieve big things. We all want to encourage development, but we need a trusting environment to help do that effectively. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenks. Now we get back to the proposition, and we have the 7 minutes for the proposition. So Nelson and Dermot, just to be sure, for the intervention, we need the speaker to accept the intervention. You can write it down, and the speaker should follow the chat just to see if there is an intervention. And for each intervention, there is a 30 seconds extra for the speaker, so they can talk. So I have seven minutes. You can divide it as you wish. Go ahead.
Awesome. So yeah, hey everyone, my name is Nelson. So first I'm going to rebuttal against Zatar's points, and then I'm going to dive into Jinx's points. And then if I have time, I will talk about a third point, which Dermot didn't get to talk about. So the first point in terms of Zatar's argument around introducing controls, I think one important distinction we should make here is, we're talking about efficiency of allocating capital, essentially, and we're measuring the sort of performance of that in terms of the KPI, which is like impact. Implementing, I guess my key challenge here would be implementing like a shadow committee, which sort of takes these decisions out of the public eye and people can vet them before they go to the community. We take that process out of the open and we take it into the shadows. And I think there is a really important learning that happens when decisions get made in a public forum, because you sort of govern through precedent. And from my experience, working with Live Big Grants, I've seen that making it easy for new people joining the community to understand how decisions get made and what's the criteria they're being assessed on, helps them understand if it's worth the work upfront to put together a grant proposal. Because there's a lot of work to be done, creating the proposal, speccing out what they want to build, navigating the community, understanding, okay, why could this get declined? How do I meet the criteria? Taking that to the shadows, I think, makes that whole process a lot more, it passes the risk on to the contributor to understand all of this stuff and to have behind closed door conversations, which I think is something that we should be deterring. I would also push back against, there's an assumption that increasing the barriers to participation won't reduce engagement. I think that's a huge assumption, particularly if we're to then jump to Jinx's point, if we're going to ask people to submit a passport to participate, I think that's a pretty huge hurdle. And I don't really see why the pedigree or experience is relevant to someone's ability and contribution. If someone can deliver great code and has proven themselves in the community on past proposals, I don't think they should be passed because they haven't worked at Facebook or something like that. So I do think there is, if people want to stay anonymous and contribute to the project, there is a value in people demonstrating themselves in past proposals and building it up over time. And so I think, to Jinx's point on some of the past projects which have failed, I don't think we can look at failures and come to conclusions that just because one bet didn't pan out, that it's not worth making bets anymore. I think there's a difference between risk and sizing as well, and that if something is high risk, it needs to be sized accordingly. With some of these instances, if a project disengages, obviously that's not desirable, but it does happen with grants. People get disengaged, people hit roadblocks, and I do think that if we feel that the community was unhappy with the result, perhaps that's because we didn't size that properly. Sorry, Steve, I just saw your did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious how you measure that sentiment. Like, how do you know when friction is greater or less? It seems to me that this is a very subjective idea and that we could debate where that line is indefinitely. But what is your measure of we are making things less with less friction or more friction? We're making things better. We're creating making things worse. How do you measure that?
I would measure in economic terms because that's how grantees are going to think. And that is, how many hours of work is it going to take me to put together a proposal? How many hours of work is it going to take me to get that proposal approved? If it takes me 4 hours to put together a proposal because the due diligence is so comprehensive, I need to provide a whole resume and cover letter and apply basically the same process as applying for a job, then I might as well just go focus on a full-time job. And I think the great thing about these sort of grants is that often it's people who have a day job, and this is something they're doing at night. And I think there is something really powerful to creating a community of experts. Perhaps there's people who run validators as their day job, and they understand these problems much more deeply than people on the Pocket Network Inc. team may be able to. Bringing those people in, and in their free time, if they can identify a problem and propose a solution, an idea that the core team hasn't have, I think that's the true thing that we're missing out on. And I think the ultimate measurement of friction will be time and cost. And if there's a full KYC process, I think all of that adds to that sort of implied cost and risk reward for the person applying.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure.
It's related. Would you say that right now there is too much friction? It's sort of a two-part question. Would you say that right now there is too much friction? And also, is it possible that a clearer framework would make it easier for somebody to understand how to propose something? I know I've proposed things, and a big part of the friction in my experience was really understanding through messaging and unclear guidelines how to even go at this process.
That's a fair point. I think there's definitely benefits to structure. I don't think we're saying complete lack of structure. But I think we're trying to avoid a committee which is making these decisions out of the open. I think we can have a structure around it. So because the other point too is I think grants or whatever you want to call it, funding is a product. And if the process is unclear, if part of that equation is I need to wait 2 months to hear back on if I'm being funded, that's going to weigh in on future people whether they apply or not. So I think that's something that has to be factored in.
So you
Yes.
are saying that a structure does make more sense. I mean, I think the committee debate is the next debate, but for this one, you're saying that you do agree that there should be more structure.
I think there should be structure in like the steps into which a proposal gets approved, and it should be very clear to everyone before they put together a proposal. I'm not saying this should go to a private committee that makes the decisions. I think the other point here too is like there's going to be some inefficiency. You know, I really do think grants are similar to like a venture model where we're looking for those. Yeah, we're looking for those projects which can really move the needle for the Pocket community. That can make it possible for developers to understand Pocket, to do things that weren't possible before, and that's what we're really funding here. We're looking for that 100-to-1 sort of bet, and we need to reduce the friction to enable people to do that, to lower the costs involved in making a proposal. And I also think that we need to size these grants, properly. There has been a little bit of press in the community of people asking for very large grants, and I think we should split that away from, how much funding should this team get versus should this, team be funded at all? Because just because something's high risk doesn't mean it shouldn't be funded. There'll be people that maybe don't have the same track record as other people, but can execute and have proven themselves in the community, which we've seen examples of that in the Pocket community as well. People who've come out of nowhere and built a lot of really important stuff to the community today. And I think we want to keep that kind of meritocracy that if you have great ideas, you can make things happen.
Moez, is that
Thanks. Yeah.
was that 7 minutes or is it me next?
It was 8 minutes 30 because there were 3 interventions, and we
right.
said with each intervention a 30 seconds plus, an extra 30 seconds for the team that get asked a question. So now we go back to opposition and the last speech before the audience, and you have 5 minutes. Just to make sure, try when you intervene to make it a quick question, no more than 10 or 15 seconds. And for each question, you have 30 seconds plus for the speaker. And for this one, 5 minutes, no more than 2 interventions. Okay? So go ahead. Next, I'm not sure. Is it Steve?
I can do it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it's Ramiro.
Ramiro? Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay, well, I will try to answer the question, some of the points that were recent. You talked about no behind closed doors conversations, and I think we agree. We don't that one either. We don't want to create like a censorship board to say what is going to be proposed and what is not. We just want to keep it to the minimum as possible and to keep it private only for things that should be kept in private, like background checks for the proposers. We don't want to. We think we need some background checks because we don't want to get Pocket to be linked to the wrong kind of media exposure. So we want to have at least some clarity on who are we giving money to. Then, for this reason, we do not completely agree that the contributor should stay anonymous. He can be anonymous to the community, but maybe it won't be a good idea if he stays anonymous to the DAO itself. Then you talked about that if projects failed in the past, that it doesn't mean that new projects will fail in the future. Yeah, that's completely true. But if we don't do anything about it, if we just keep using the same system that we have today, that's essentially no system at all to track the big projects, we should expect to have the same results. So I think we need, and we agree that we need some kind of organization that checks what is going to be proposed, and also that makes it easier for the DAO to analyze these projects. It does not mean that the DAO, that this committee will somehow censorship or not allow something to go to vote. The proposer can always do that, but it will be harder to get it to pass through a DAO vote if it was not reviewed or it is clear for the community. Finally, you talked about frictionless as the time that is needed to do the due diligence. So if you spend, like, for example, 40 hours to create some code with an excellent new feature, yeah, Dermot, you can.
Yeah, sorry, just to be clear, and I completely agree that the motion is difficult in terms of the words, but yeah, the way we thought about frictionless is very much just something that's more intuitive and like human centric. So it's not overly formal, over the top structured. It's not kind of opaque as that kind of hidden kind of committee would be. So it's, and of course, part of that is how easy is it for you to get going? Is it clear what the process is, how it works, etc. All of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how we think about frictionless. It's not saying completely laissez-faire or anything of the sort.
Okay, yeah, I think we are agreeing on that. We are the only point that I want to make about the friction, and you phrased it in hours that you need to dedicate to due diligence, is that if you spend 14 hours creating code, you can take 2 or 4 hours to make it clear for the community and the DAO to analyze it, because it seems not fair that, okay, I can spend like 100 hours making a new Pocket wallet and then just spend like 30 minutes creating a post and turning to the community all the effort to understand what I am doing. Maybe I'm not good at commenting. Maybe I'm not good at posting. We will need some kind of guidance that will tell, okay, you will need a diagram for this. You cannot post this like that. Or maybe you're not fluent in English and your writing is just bad. We need someone to take care of those things. What we are proposing is more like that, like shaping and enable the DAO to make more to make decisions faster and clearer. Yes, Nelson?
Yeah, one question I just wanted to ask in regards to the KYC, what is sufficient KYC here? Are we talking about them submitting a passport to ensure they're not in a sanctioned country, or are we talking about criminal background checks, or are we talking about references from past employers?
No, I think we are talking about like prominent criminal records. Like, okay, a guy comes and he's like a convicted scammer. So that kind of person, it will like rise up the alarms. You are giving money to someone who is known for having make scams, or I don't know, you are giving money to someone who's related to a terrorist association. I don't know, like things, like really big things, no country, because as Pocket is not aligned, it's not based on a given country. The rules and what is legal and what is not, and what is a felony and what's not, depends on where the contributor comes from. So I think that is a really difficult point. We have not really go really deep in that path, but we are talking about like prominent things that like evidence. Yeah, and I think that's all. 30 seconds to go. But that's all.
Thanks, Ramiro, and thank you, everyone, for the first phase of the debate. Now, before the final speeches of 3 minutes, we go to the audience. If you have a question, please try to make it brief. Even if you have an argument, just give us like the general sense and don't go into details. So go ahead. If you have a question, please you ask. But at the beginning, just say, I have this question for proposition or for opposition, just so we try to have it balanced.
I have a question. This would be for opposition, I guess, although it stems from an observation generally about the debate. There seems to be an unresolved point of tension where I think Nelson and Dermot were arguing that we don't want to have too much bureaucracy up front to onboarding and to people being able to just choose things to work on that are interesting and valuable to Pocket. The other side, Ramiro has said that someone's well, there's been two contradictory points in the opposition. The first is that the due diligence. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I've written it down, but basically, seems to be a contradiction where the opposition is saying we don't need. We do need upfront due diligence in order to prevent someone from committing time to a project that the DAO doesn't want to value. And then conversely, someone spending a lot of time building something should be willing to go through the due diligence. My question is, the due diligence that they're discussing, are they talking about it being front-loaded or back-loaded? How does that factor into the DAO deciding whether or not to pay the contributor for their work, and how do we resolve the concerns that Dermot raised and Nelson about friction there to onboarding? Sorry, go ahead, Nelson.
One distinction I just want to make.
I think.
Oh, sorry,
I think probably we can finish with all the questions, and then in the last speeches you can take the time to answer them.
Yeah, just to clarify, Ramiro commented something there. My point is that we need to make sure we're being clear on whether the due diligence is at the beginning or at the end, and that impacts on onboarding to being a contributor to the DAO. If we are doing 4 hours of due diligence at the beginning, then Nelson and Dermot's points are absolutely valid as far as friction to onboarding that will deter contributors. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah, if I can answer to that, you will need. We were talking about doing due diligence at the beginning because you have to make a proposal. You have to know at least if the community is willing or wants to have that or is willing to vote on that. That is not 2 or 4 hours of due diligence. It's only being part of the community and know and feel how is the feeling about your idea. It won't take that long. Then you can do a first proposal of what you're going to do, and that is where you get the due diligence. But you also will get paid for that, like what you called it's a pay discovery, for example. We can set up a way like your time is not being wasted only to get the DAO to know what you want to do.
Could I add a point now in response to the upfront time commitment stuff?
Is it Ramiro?
No.
Yeah, go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
can
go
I go?
ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
I also just wanted to make a distinction between time spent upfront on things that have been built before asking for funding. I think what we're talking about here is we're talking about time that needs to be spent on basically getting the proposal approved, and this could be due diligence. This could be due diligence on the team, due diligence on the problem, the idea, the solution. And I think all of this adds to time spent on things beyond what the builder actually wants to spend their time on. Where in contrast to that, I do think community, in the Pocket community, there has been a bit of a precedent set of people building something first and then asking for funding. I can say empirically at LivePick grants, I've seen far higher success rates on projects where someone's built something first and then asked for some funding. So I definitely think that's something that should always be encouraged because it also helps the grantee validate the problem and validate it within the community and gives them a higher chance of being funded. So anyway, that's my point.
My question is for the opposition. Let's say someone builds an amazing contribution to Pocket. Let's say somehow they manage to accelerate the V1 timeline significantly, but they're an anon. Do we care who they are or what their background is if we're planning to reimburse them for that contribution? Or to make it more abstract and maybe less loaded by bringing V1 into it, do we care about contributors' profiles, backgrounds, if they're not being granted any persistent powers? If all they're doing is building something and being reimbursed for that, and there's no element of trust where we have to be sure that they are not going to abuse a power because they're not being granted any powers, is due diligence necessary in those cases?
Can I answer that one?
Yeah, Steve, you have the final speech, and you can answer that during the speech.
Yeah, I think what we're advocating is
just to make sure that there is no other question, and then we start with the proposition. It will be your speech. Do we have another question here, or should we go to the final speeches? So. Yeah, so Steve, you have 3 minutes and no intervention from the other team, so you're free to go with 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, to be clear, what our position is that we need a clearer, more measured process, and that by providing a more measured process, we'll be able to improve the ease of community members engaging with the communities. And I heard the other side, as they elaborated on their arguments, say what we're advocating for, which is we really do need a structure that makes it easier to understand what needs to be done and makes it, more efficient to engage and do things. To answer Jack's question directly, I think what we're advocating, or not, I think what we are advocating is that we need a structure. The specifics in the details need to be defined. So answers to questions like, okay, do we need background checks? Maybe in some cases we do, maybe in some cases we don't. We aren't to that degree yet. What we're advocating for is that we need to be more measured in how we go at this. There needs to be more structure. It needs to be clearer, both for the protection of the DAO and for the protection and just efficiency of the contributors. We feel like what I guess we were defining as laissez-faire is equal to just not clear. And so our argument is we need a more measured approach so that we can protect the DAO while simultaneously making it easier for the community to know what needs to be done and where they can contribute and spend less time navigating that process. That's my conclusion.
Okay, thank you. You have another minute if you want to. Yeah. So thank you very much, Steve, and all the opposition team. And we finished the debate with the last speech of the proposition. You have 3 minutes. I guess Nelson or Dermot, you have 3 minutes to wrap up your speech and answer the questions. Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, I'll wrap things up. Yeah, great debate. I guess my job is easier to some extent because the opposition do actually largely agree with a lot of what we've been saying. That traditional corporate management tends to fail its workers, and we also all agree on the need to leverage the community as a priority. It's clear on our last point where we talk about the need, I guess the potential issue if we lose out on some potentially game-changing contributions, that's much worse than the risk of spending some money that the DAO won't get back. And I guess some of the difficulties we have with some of the takes that the opposition give is, even though they say they agree with us on the fact that traditional corporate management doesn't typically work, it's demoralizing, etc. It turns people away, it creates unnecessary bureaucracy, it slows things down. And also that we need to kind of beef up our community. They seem to be keen on introducing so much friction to the process that we really worry that we just won't get enough contributors to join this project and to really kind of sustain this and actually make some of those potentially game-changing contributions that Jack alluded to in terms of improving the, I guess, the kind of reducing the development timeline for something like V1. And I guess our general take on all of this is twofold, really, is that we can reduce a lot of the risk with sizing. When someone new comes to the community and they have zero reputation, they should build that up. We should have a way that they can maybe get paid $500 for doing some basic work, build up a reputation, get to know people, and they can size that up over time. And then I think the more unclear the outcome is, and the longer it is and the bigger the quantum, for sure, we should have more extensive questions and get to know them better, build up that kind of reputation contribution. I think that's important. On the other side, we're very much against the idea of creating, we talk about an oversight committee, that's management. We've basically built a corporation. It's like who appoints them, who manages them? Okay, maybe they're paid full time, but are they good managers? How are they trained? It introduces a lot of questions that are unanswered, and I don't think that scales very well. I also don't think it's a very enjoyable place to work. I think, as I mentioned before, traditional corporate management doesn't work. So actually putting that management structure by definition won't work itself. So, and that, to our answer to that is actually culture. So I think it's good that we have had some examples. So we've had 12 contributors so far in the history of the DAO over the last 2 years, only 12. And I think Jinx pointed out quite rightly, there's been a few of them that haven't been so good. That's great. I think it'd be cool to learn from that and understand what could be changed. And actually our argument is actually that there should be a greater culture of, I guess, all of us taking responsibility to figure out what's going on with some of these contributors. And yes, maybe paying them on a 2-week basis. And if we're not getting information from them on what they're doing, we don't necessarily need a formal status update. But I think we should all be thinking and acting like we are working in an open source project, which it is. And that's actually encouraging a culture of collaboration and transparency, really. And if people aren't doing that, I think we can cut them off. So I think we shouldn't dictate exactly what everyone should do and how they should do it. They should have that freedom to decide that themselves, but then they should opt into our culture of and follow our key values around transparency, collaboration, and working like a true open source project. Thanks. So, okay, cool. Yeah. I'll drop it there. Yeah, I was going to talk about KYC, but I'll leave it there. Thanks all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dermot, and thanks to all the debaters. I hope that was insightful for everyone, and that concludes our first debate. So I think that went well with interventions for a first time. Just for the next debate, for those who ask the questions or make the interventions, try just to not exceed 10 or 15 seconds. If you need to write it down, the question or the comment, and deliver it quickly, so that the idea is that you say something and ask something in 10 seconds, and the speaker will answer it in 20 seconds. That's why we give them an extra 30 seconds. So I think we should go to the second debate. So the DAO should be willing to fully delegate certain powers, rather than limiting committees to an advisory role and requiring all action to go through a majority vote. And to defend that position, we have Jinx, Dermot, and Zatar, and the opposition will consist of Ramiro and Steve. So I think we can start with the proposition, same format. So we will have 5 minutes at the beginning for the proposition. Who's the first speaker of proposition?
I am.
Jinx? Okay, so go ahead, you have the floor.
I'm going to try and move through a little quickly because I see we're going along on time and I don't want to keep everyone here all afternoon. I think that it's an important thing to consider establishing some committees with certain delegated powers for a few reasons. One, duty to serve. We've had some talks in the past, and there have even been several forum posts that are bemoaning the fact that in our current voting structure, we have an issue where potentially we have non-involved voters who once qualified stay qualified forever, and then potentially can come in and influence policy when they are not even aware of what the current structure or the current considerations are in the ecosystem. Having a duty to serve in the form of committee members has people who are, within elected terms who are always expected to be participating in every proposal and every vote on a regular basis and staying in touch with the needs of the community and the ecosystem at the time. I also think that there is a value to expertise. One of the things that we've dealt with in recent proposals is how to appropriately engage and compensate with people for the long term who contribute significant expertise to the space. Having a committee structure where we have standalone selected experts who are part of committees that are focused on some of these overarching issues like economics or technology is a way to ensconce expertise within our DAO in a structured way that fairly compensates them for their time and keeps them engaged on from a long-term perspective. Agility and governance is an important part as well, because we need the ability to move quickly on some things without having to go through the entire long-term DAO approval process, and giving a committee a budget and a certain power limitation allows them to make some decisions on the fly that allows for faster movement of DAO governance. And then finally, a committee structure also allows for some checks and balances. If a committee is not performing well, an oversight committee can retract some of that action. Or if the DAO at large feels like the committee has made a wrong decision on something, the DAO at large could then potentially vote to pull those powers back. So those are the core aspects of why we are in favor of a committee with delegated powers. You said 1 minute to go. Is that right?
Yeah, 3 minutes to go if you want.
Oh, okay, cool. Whew. I saw the 1 minute to go in chat and thought I was already running behind. All right, so just to expound on that a little bit, I guess I didn't have to move quite as quickly. There are so many things that we have to put up to a full DAO vote all the time, which probably shouldn't be a DAO vote. For instance, the Reddit marketing proposal earlier on. If we have a marketing and communications focused committee that has an established quarterly budget and an established ability within the DAO governance system to make some decisions on the fly about how DAO funds are spent in support of DAO objectives, that allows for a much faster execution of certain governance goals than having to go through a formal proposal process every single time. Using the formal proposal process to establish the construction and the powers and the budget for that DAO makes much more sense from a greater agility and governance perspective to accomplish some of these goals without getting deadlocked into sometimes much longer than needed debates. But additionally, I want to go back to that value of expertise. One of the things that we struggled with in the past is how do we account for people who want to contribute long-term in a structured fashion to DAO governance. Having those committees of experts with an established budget where they're working together, not as single one-off vendors, really provides an easy way to bring those people in and provide a long-term structure to benefit from that expertise. And I'll surrender my time from there.
Okay, thank you. And now we go to the answer of the opposition. And the first speaker will be.
I think I'm doing that, the first rebuttal, Steve. So Jinx.
Yeah, so you have 7 minutes. You can divide them as you wish, but 3 minutes rebuttal, 4 minutes to build your case. So you have the floor.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do 3 minutes, and then Ramiro is going to do 4 minutes. So I'll start. Jinx pointed out 4 things rather: duty to serve, a way to maximize expertise, a way to move faster, and a way to pull back power. And my first question would be: do we need that right now? Are we not going fast enough currently? We heard in the previous debate that we aren't even getting the flow of proposals that we are hoping for right now. And so I'm not sure that the problem exists currently that would require a committee of any sort. How do we enforce duty to serve? It sort of makes the assumption that if somebody was on a committee that they would feel the same, or somebody that's not on a committee would feel less of a need or obligation or affinity to serve. And I would say that if you look at the current DAO voters, I think there's 52 of them, all have shown quite a commitment, not just to get through to get the vote, which is not an easy thing to do, but also most are involved in the community, answering questions, and are displaying what I would definitely say is a very clear duty to serve without any need for a committee. And by the other point, minimizing access to expertise, I think committees will just amplify the limitation of access to expertise. Everything that we talk about with Pocket is interdependent. So governance and tokenomics and technology, they're all interdependent. You really can't operate in a committee silo and do that effectively without expertise across all of those different areas. And when you start splitting people into committees, you're creating overhead that's going to increase the complexity of decision making. And we have a great system that's in place right now. 52 very, very committed and capable and a broad range of expertise that is looking at these as they come up, and we are not having any of the issues that have been outlined, at least that I'm aware of, or our side is aware of. And that's my initial rebuttal. I think Romero is going to pick up from here.
Yeah, okay. I will make the arguments a little more structured, but repeat some of the concepts that Steve just said. Currently, in the Pocket, community is working, and it's difficult to assess the real size. We currently have around 20,000 users in this Discord channel, and from those 2,000, only 50 possess a DAO vote. But these 50 guys are not randomly chosen from the community. They are engaged users that took the time and effort to follow the voter's path. So we can trust them a little. We believe that the current system is not broken. There might come a time when we will need larger structures and delegation of power, but the time is not yet, we think. Transitioning to a power delegation system is not simple, and it is not clear that it's required, and it raises many questions that I will try to explain here. For example, what are the indicators currently suggest that things could be done in a better with a power transfer? It is not clear that power delegation will bring to the community, what it will bring to the community. In fact, there are many examples against power delegations, for example, justice system, governments, the International Monetary Fund, and so on. It is hard to know if power delegation could bring us a better and faster decisions. You can probably achieve the same goals with simpler mechanisms. But if you are to create a committee, how can we transfer the responsibility? The decision power comes with responsibility. How can we transfer it to the committees? If committees are to make a bad choice, it will be difficult to blame them, as there will be the experts in the subject. Then it will be the DAO's fault for having them elected in the first place. So the DAO will always hold the ultimate responsibility, but without power. Then how many committees would we need? The Pocket is a broad project. No community will be omniscient, and lots of experts will be needed to cover all the aspects. We will end up with a number of committees that is like 5, 7, and that's like 10% of the DAO voter base. It's not logical. Then how will the scope of each committee be defined? Who will decide which committee is fit for analyzing a given proposal and which is not? This will create a new layer of bureaucracy over or between the committees that will need to be there to coordinate their work. It will make this, the system more complex. And if there is a problem, if two different committees have different opinions, who will be there to solve these problems? It will be the DAO, once again, the one that will have to make a decision. Then, how do we elect these community members? The committee members should remain neutral to the proposals they will analyze and present. Given the community has not yet reached a considerable size, it will be difficult to find apt members outside the core team and the DAO voters group. It will be also difficult to select a member for a committee based on their skill rather than its popularity. The community is not big enough, and prominent members of the community can sway elections if they put enough effort. If the DAO power is then transferred by a single election, this could be a real problem. Then, how can we ensure that the committee members will perform their duty. The committee members can underperform due to many valid reasons such as jobs, families, or other can simply disappear. We will need once again to have a succession mechanism and dispute solving mechanism, add more and more complexity. All these questions make up for a single one. Do we really need to do this now? We believe that we can solve many of the problems that we currently have with proposals by just adding more guidance to the proposers and curating the proposals so the community and the DAO specifically can process them more effectively. The DAO is currently small and has a good number of experts in its ranks. From engineers to lawyers and scientists, we only need to capitalize these talents, not take the power away from them. That's it.
Thank you very much. Very nice timing. So thank you for that speech, Ramiro. And now we go back to proposition. You have 7 minutes. I guess Dermot and Zatar, you have 7 minutes. You can share them as you want. So go ahead.
So I'll start with the rebuttal, and then Dermot will follow me. Ramiro raised a lot of points. I'll respond to a number of them in no particular order. But one of the points he made is, how do you enforce the duty to serve? What's the accountability of the committee members? How would that work? Well, the committee members are not anonymous, so their reputations are at stake. So people will know what they're deciding, why they've decided in the way that they decided, and they're accountable to the electorate in subsequent elections if they seek to be re-elected. They'll lose their positions if they don't perform their functions well. In addition, Ramiro mentioned, well, they have family responsibilities. How do we know they're going to take the time to do their jobs properly? Well, we'll pay them. We'll pay them to do research proposals, to assess whether work has met guidelines needed to get paid. Now, the way it is now, you have an anonymous group of, well, we know who the voters are, but we don't know who's voting in which way most of the time, because we've just got wallet addresses that are unidentified, supporting different proposals. So again, that reputation is important, and that will help guarantee that committees do their work properly. Another issue that was raised was, well, what about proposals where different areas of expertise are engaged? Well, if different areas of expertise are involved, then you get the relevant committees to work together. So for some proposals might involve an economic aspect and a technical aspect. You get those two committees to work together on that and combine, focus their joint expertise. Scope of responsibility for the committees, how is that going to be defined? Well, the DAO will decide on that in a vote, and so it's not really that complicated. How many committees will be needed? Ramiro suggests that there'll be a huge number of committees. Well, that's not necessarily the case. We start off with the committees that we know we'll need and take it from there. Absolutely necessary to have a technical committee, an economics committee, maybe a marketing committee, and a governance committee. That pretty much sums up what we'll need at the outset, and we can add committees very carefully, starting from that point onward. And
Thanks.
yeah, those are my points.
Thanks. Now we go to Dermot. Go ahead.
Cool. Thanks, Zatar. Yeah, I mean, so on our side, Jinx is kind of, and Zatar really put very clearly our kind of takes across those kind of core 4 points: duty to serve, value of experience, agility and governance, as well as the checks and balances. you only have to really look at what's been happening in governance to kind of see the issues as it even stands today. Because as a voter, you have ultimately limited interest in certain topics, and there's other topics that you really care about. And we have this major kind of, swinging effect where there's some issues which actually could be quite minor in the grand scheme of things, but people are interested, and there's non-stop comments, and it takes weeks and weeks for anything to go to a vote, and then maybe it's pretty contentious, or maybe people even end up not voting when it gets to it. And then there are other forum proposals where there's zero input and nobody even votes on it really when it gets there. And so there's just a real dichotomy here. And I think this is the kind of the importance of, and the value of a committee is to have, as we're talking, focused, responsible people with their reputations on the line, maybe getting paid if that's what we think is relevant. And they then have the bandwidth to deal with these issues, tease them out, make sure they have the relevant expertise, and share that with the community to the extent what they're doing, how they're thinking. And if the community doesn't agree with what they're doing, they can be voted off. So there are those checks and balances there. And also just at scale, as the protocol grows, the number of community members grows, the DAO grows, there is that mental overload, and voting on everything just doesn't scale. And if we look across to what ultimately are kind of what we talk about as Pocket as emulating, which is nation states or network states, wherever you want to put it, representative democracy is the best way to do that. So we look to delegate some of our authority, not all of it, to certain committees with power. And maybe that could be, for example, in the case of something like marketing, it could be starting off with maybe 25K in a kind of a multi-sig with 3 people managing that. And that could be, I think it was $500 or $1,000 on a Reddit kind of campaign. That's great. We can monitor that. Maybe we could even start something smaller. So I think we can really think about sizing to limit the risk. And I think we can monitor this, and then maybe to see about spinning up new committees where we feel that they will be valuable and that the community will benefit from as well. And you look across the kind of examples in startups, there's the kind of the famous example of the startup, the kind of the 2 pizza teams at Amazon. Small teams work much better together. 52 people or 3 people in terms of voters to manage and corral across every decision is just a bit of a nightmare. And there's going to be times when we're all going to be quite busy and just cannot focus and take in all of this information. And really, I guess that's where we kind of stand. So I think we can de-risk everything in terms of sizing, reducing the budget initially, making sure the right people are staffed, and don't look to put everything into a committee. Just start simply, start clearly, and put the proper principles and processes in place. And to do that, I think we're in a much better position, because going back to some of the earlier points, we clearly don't have enough contributors to the DAO, and there's clearly a lot of interest in areas that people do want to get across, but the pain of going through the forum process and getting this approved is actually just too long and too painful. 3 to 4 weeks for some very minor things. So I think we just need to remove some of this friction and just get moving a lot quicker on certain issues. And or otherwise, I think, goes to some of the earlier points, we just run the risk of getting overtaken by some of the other protocols and competing organizations that we're up against.
Thanks, David. And we go back to opposition with Steve, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. 5 minutes.
Yeah. So clearly from the responses that you just heard, there is an enormous amount of complexity that would go into forming these committees, electing these committees, voting on who should be in the committees, unvoting on people when they aren't supposed to be in the committee. I mean, we're adding complexity on top of complexity, and what you get with that is not faster, you get slower. And that is that's what we're facing. Dermot mentioned representative democracy. We have a representative democracy right now. We have 52 people that are representing a community of 20 some odd thousand based on the size of the members in Discord. It's probably a lot bigger than that, but 52, relatively speaking, is is a small, agile representation of a larger community. The interdependence isn't, it hasn't been addressed and needs to be addressed. Again, I said this earlier, you can't make some of these decisions in a silo. So if you have, for example, a technical community that's making decisions on a technical product that will have an impact on tokenomics, they can't operate independently. So you won't speed things up. you'll make things more complex. And by making things more complex, you'll slow things down. And the thing that I think, Romero and I talked back and forth about is like, how are we measuring that there is a problem right now? I know Dermot has said like we've only had X number of proposals and contributors, but is it because of the decision making and voting process, or could it also be because there isn't clear guidelines on how people do submit proposals, or maybe documentation in certain areas isn't enough for people to feel comfortable? I mean, there are so many other possible reasons why we don't have the volume of community contributions. And the number, and Dermot pointed this out, the number of proposals that have been through is relatively few, and we're very early on in the entire process. And from our perspective, yeah, there's room for improvement for sure, but we haven't done enough to improve what we have. And the position here that we should change it all and redo it is in our opinion something that just doesn't make sense, given that there is no way to measure whether or not these changes will have a positive impact. But there's certainly a way to measure the complexity that's going to be added as a result of them.
Yeah. Maybe you want to accept a question from Dermot?
Dermot, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Dermot. Happy to.
Yes. Sorry. I'm actually going to tee it up for my good and esteemed colleague Jinx to respond to this. So don't worry about me.
Jinx.
Oh, I have all my notes together for our final point in the proposal.
Well,
so Steve, are you done with your speech, or
no,
you still have 1 minute and a half? Yeah,
okay,
go ahead,
well,
Ramiro.
I will add some more points. You talked about making decisions on the fly, and that not everything is worthy of DAO vote. I don't think that we need for this a committee. You just need to make a distinction of this kind of decisions and fast track some proposals. It could be you can find a solution using a much more simpler system that do not add the amount of bureaucracy that delegating power means. And also, you talked about limiting somehow the power and the budget of the committees. I would like if you could tell us a little more about this. How deep is this limitation that you're talking about? Because if you are going to create more bureaucracy only to allow them to do small decisions of small budget, what is the point? Why enter on all this trouble when we could create a specific category of small budget proposals? And that's it, I think.
Thanks, Ramiro, and thank you, everyone. Now we get to the audience questions. So anyone who has a question for either the opposition or proposition, you can go ahead, or if you want to write them down in the chat, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment and really question. On the last Node Runners community call, we primarily talked about this, and I believe that's going to be uploaded so other people can reference it. But I would love to hear, really even both sides talk about PIP22 and how these different methods would apply to how PIP22 is kind of proceeded. Basically, in the Node Runner community call, on the forums and all sorts of stuff, there's been just a lot of tension over is PIP22, balancing things out? Are there economic elements to PIP22 that are not being taken into account? Because there have been a lot of changes in the network since PIP22. Some of them folks feel are unaccounted for, and then the vast majority of community calls, especially with Node Runners, are trying to dissect what are the issues. Are these PIP22 issues? Are they what exactly are they? And really what's been coming down to is there's just been a huge social cost on PIP22 because there hasn't been a lot of understanding over how it's been implemented. So really, my question is, because of the social nature of something like PIP22 that was not like fully mapped out, and we didn't have a lot of expertise talking about certain elements of this proposal that were beyond just simply math. But the effect of now having some community or having larger node runners want to skew or consolidated nodes wanting to have rewards favor them versus smaller node runners wanting to have rewards favoring them, which PIP22 now enables to have these node classes, which is causing a lot of chaos and confusion, I feel. So I'd love to hear both sides on that's kind of where we're at today, and I'd love to hear how both sides kind of see that. Is this a win of not having a committee that's able to kind of dissect some of this stuff, or is it better to have a committee that's able to address a lot more issues than simply math?
Thanks, Shane.
Can I do a
go ahead,
5-second jump in here and just say that I think this is a huge topic and we don't have time and it's inappropriate for this call. No offense, Shane. I agree with you on most things, but I don't think this is appropriate for this call.
Can I respond to Shane with something that I think is appropriate for the call, not getting into the specifics?
Could you do it in the last speech, or is it possible?
Yeah, I can add in and wrap up.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Go ahead, Jack.
So yeah, I had a comment related to Shane's question. I think there's two positive insights that you can track from what Shane, the scenario that Shane was discussing. Number one is, do past events suggest that a committee making decisions, the oversight would be subpar? That's the kind of worms that I think Ben Van's not really wanting us to get into, because there's a lot of loaded opinions in that. But the one I want you to touch on is a different philosophical question, which is, if a committee it works on a solution that has already been approved, or works on a solution that seeks to move in the right direction, but may be imperfect, should their compensation for the work that they did be dependent on the success of or the perceived success of the solution? I guess to get more to the point, do the people who disagree with PIP22 believe that Andy and MSA also should not be reimbursed for their work implementing PIP22? And if so, why? Because in my view, we should be unpacking reimbursement for contributions to building out solutions, even if those solutions in practice end up that lead to needing tweaks. I think if we tie compensation for work too tightly to immediate short-term outcomes, will cause a chilling effect where people will not want to contribute to things that have an element of uncertainty. Exactly what the impact will be. So I just wanted to extract that question from what Shane had talked about. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Jack. So probably now we get to the final speeches, and starting with the opposition. I guess, Steve, you go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to answer some of these questions, but I want to point out really two things. And one is, do we want to add complexity? Occam's razor, complexity is not something that we want to knowingly do unless we absolutely have to. And what the proposal for committees is introducing is a tremendous amount of complexity. I agree with Ben Van's point that we don't want to dive into PIP 22 on this thing, but one thing I would say is that PIP 22 added a lot of complexity. And when you add complexity, you create variables and you create a lot of questions that, right or wrong, when there's complexity there, it's harder to understand, and it's going to create friction, and it's going to slow things down. And we don't need more complexity right now. What we need is more clarity. We have a system in place, but we haven't defined guidelines around how to use the existing system. So some of the debates that you see going on over proposals that were related to PIP 22, these were new things introduced. Should we pay somebody ongoing, sort of in an employee type role? These are things that should have been defined and haven't been defined. And the reason that they haven't, or because they haven't, you're getting proposals because there are no guidelines. We can just sort of do whatever we want. And that risks adding things that open up a lot of new questions and increase the complexity and make decision-making harder. And to the point here on this, on this debate topic, we are going to add a tremendous amount of complexity and make things extremely difficult if we move toward adding committees to try to make decision making in, like, at this stage, before we've even refined what we've got in place right now that is early stage, but it's working. Can it be working better? Of course, but that's why we need to refine it. We don't need to change it. Nothing's broken. And that is my conclusion.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much. And now we go to the final speech of the debate with a proposition. I guess, Jinx.
Yep.
You have the floor, sir.
Big thanks to everyone who debated here today. I really appreciate all the thoughtfulness that has gone into both sides of both of these propositions. I do want to address a couple of points that were made along the way. This is not about the current 52 voters in the DAO. That was brought up a lot. This is about the future when there are 500 voters or 1,000 or more. And this is not a representative democracy because the current voters don't serve a constituency. They serve themselves, and that's an important distinction. And I would challenge the claim that they are committed voters. There are 52 voters in the DAO, but a third of them passed the last 10 approved proposals, total votes, and 7 of those proposals, 7 recent proposals were passed by 10 or less voters. The idea that we have a committed voter base of 52 is just not borne out by the facts. Worrying about a congressional level of bureaucracy when we currently have none at all is like worrying about how to manage $1 billion when you currently have 1,000. We are so far out from a place of complexity that those concerns are just sort of born of lack of knowledge, of lack of idea, of lack of design. The concerns about complexity and committee design are really just that, a question of design. Committee members who are elected by the community following committee rules can resolve some of the concerns around mitigating bureaucracy and keep it light and fast, and allow us to do things like run that Reddit campaign without having to go through an extended voting process. There are a ton of things that committees could do faster than what the larger group does now. And to wrap up with thinking about PIP 22 in particular, because it was such a large topic, we had multiple people who were economics contributors to that conversation, but MSA was probably the loudest voice as a co-proposer, whereas some of the other people who had concerns about the economic structure of that proposal, Tracy, for instance, and Ramiro, and then some others in the community, their voice wasn't heard as loudly, and I think may have impacted that vote in total. If all of them on both sides of that proposal were comprised in an economics committee that was putting out a complete pros and cons analysis and given the same weight, I think the outcome of that proposal might have gone a little bit differently. So I think that, when we talk about fear of complexity, that's reasonable. When we talk about fear of bureaucracy, that's reasonable. But we're starting at 0, and there's a lot of room to move here to create a light, agile, well-formed organizational structure that doesn't layer us in complexity, but does allow us to move faster and with a strong duty to serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jinx, and thanks to all debaters and all the teams. So we finished the 2 debates today. I just want to thank everyone and thank the audience for their attention and the questions. I would like to invite anyone who has a remark or feedback about the format and how the debates went, what to improve, what they think we should capitalize on, to communicate with us, to get in touch with Jack or me. And also you can express that on the survey. So again, please fill in the survey. Take your time. There will be some general assessment about the proposal process, the voting, the reading, debating proposals, etc. Third point, I encourage others to participate in future debates, to express yourselves about what to do, what to uphold, and especially if we get to more practical debates about what to implement, etc. I just wanted to point out very quickly, just a reminder about the objectives of town halls. It's important that we include everyone. This is the essence of decentralization. Communication is key, but in our world, it's even more important. Second, we want to build an environment of direct exchange where arguments are under scrutiny of rigorous research, data, and logic. Hence, this will inform better decision making. We want to incentivize research and preparation for these debates that break down different notions and make information accessible to all members of the community with examples, etc., making them easier, more accessible. And we also want to build trust and respect by having a public space for expression and allow for different opinions to be expressed and understood, even if not adopted. So this is important. And also, I think it's important also, since this is something that will be shared in other platforms, to get more exposure of Pocket Network in the world at large. We would like to welcome the teams, just as a follow-up to express that we care about after the debate. So this is a suggestion to submit like a debate report and how they saw the debate. And also, probably the next town hall, we can also grant each team a 3-minute speech if they want to follow up on something in their case. Another point is that we are working on other formats and structure for debates to come. So this is just the beginning, and we have a lot of other options that we can work on so that we can optimize these debates. So and finally, thanks, Jack, for supporting me in this. This has been very interesting, and I like that today the interventions, the point of information. I would like to thank the debaters. It's not easy. There was like the approach, is it going to be messy or not? But I think that was a successful thing, especially in the first debate. So thank you very much. And Jack, if you have the floor, if you want.
Yeah, I'd just like to add a thank you to the debaters for for helping us all to do some sense making here. I think that we are discussing some really hot topics right now in the DAO, and solving these issues will be key to success for Pocket as a whole. I think that the solution for both problems lies somewhere in between both sides of the debate. So, and I personally feel that I'm coming away from this with a lot more insights about the different nuances that we need to take into account when designing a solution. I am looking forward to actually going back over the recording of the call and replaying points and taking notes and incorporating it all into some of the work that we're doing on the core governance team, and that perhaps a future governance working group would be doing on some solutions here that will address some of these needs. So yeah, with that in mind, just thank you to all the debaters for contributing to that. You've come with a lot of great insights, and I think the DAO is going to be better for it.
Cheers, all. That was good fun.
Same. I really appreciate hearing everyone's viewpoints.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Big
Thank
time.
you,
Cheers, all.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Leave
Thank
it
you, everyone.
Remember to fill out the
to
survey.
the
There's
presenters.
a link in the comments. Have a great day, everyone.